When you sit down in a Belgian brasserie for a steak, pork or poultry dish, you're almost always presented with a choice of sauces. Today the focus is on one of them, Stroganoff sauce. Stroganoff is a creamy, paprika-infused sauce with mushrooms and onions, made with a splash of vodka. You can pair it with beef or pork, but I personally love it with poultry. And such, I'm preparing a turkey roast using a turkey filet. I start with the turkey, seasoning it generously with salt and pepper on both sides. In a hot pan, I add a splash of oil and sear the smooth side of the filet first to get a beautiful golden crust. Once seared, I add a knob of butter, I flip the meat and lower the heat. And begin basting the turkey to coat everything with butter. I transfer the pan to a preheated oven at 160°C 320°F. I am looking for an internal temperature of 67°C 153°F. While the turkey is in the oven, I move on to the components of the sauce. I start by cleaning and dicing an onion. For the bell pepper, I have a rather uniquely shaped red one today. It almost looks like a pair of lips. I always clean my bell peppers by cutting off the top and the bottom first. This allows me to easily remove the seeds with a small knife. By flattening the bell pepper with my hand, I can easily cut it into simple strips. I do the same for the bottom and the top part of the bell pepper. Lastly, I clean 500 grams of mushrooms. There are many ways to do this, but I prefer to trim the stems and wipe away any remaining dirt or soil with a piece of paper towel. I cut my mushrooms in half and then in smaller pieces. All my ingredients are now ready and I begin by sauteing the mushrooms in oil. I want to develop a light colorful flavor, but I'm careful to not overbrown them, as I want the sauce to retain a reddish look and not turn into a brown sauce. At a certain point, the mushrooms will release a lot of water. When they start to boil in their own liquid, I add some salt. This will help to extract the maximum amount of water, allowing the flavors to concentrate. I continue frying until all the moisture has evaporated and the mushrooms start to sizzle and color again. Once the mushrooms are ready, I set them aside in a bowl. In the same pan, I add a knob of butter and sweat the onions with the bell pepper. I want to soften them without picking up too much color. When they're starting to get soft, I add sweet paprika and a touch of cayenne pepper for warmth. I toast the spices for a minute. I deglaze the pan with a splash of vodka. I add back my mushrooms before adding my homemade demi-glace. For a red color, I add a little bit of tomato paste. I do not want the tomato flavor, just a little bit for color. As a substitute for demi-glace, you can use a beef stock or even a beef stock cube, but be very mindful of your salt levels if you do, and 200 grams of heavy cream. And let the sauce simmer gently for about 10 minutes. The natural gelatin in the demi-glace combined with the cream will thicken the sauce beautifully. If you find your sauce is still too runny, you can always use a small amount of cornstarch slurry to reach the desired thickness. Since the sauce is already packed with vegetables and keeping the side dish light, I'm preparing a lamb lettuce salad with a very simple vinaigrette. This vinaigrette just uses mustard, 1 part of vinegar, any vinegar you like, and 2 to 3 parts of oil. I'm going to use balsamic vinegar, but you can choose any vinegar you like. In a bowl, I mix my balsamic vinegar with mustard, salt and pepper. If you place a wet paper towel under your bowl, it does not move constantly while whisking. And while whisking continuously, I slowly add my oil. The mustard that acts as an emulsifier, binding the oil and the vinegar into a smooth, stable dressing. I have made much more than I would need for today, and you can store the leftover vinaigrette in the fridge for 1 to 2 weeks. What's left in the bowl is more than enough to coat my lettuce. A quick tip: always dress your salad at the very last minute. The acid in the vinegar will immediately start to wilt the leaves. The turkey is done. It has reached that internal temperature of 67°C, but I'm going to let it rest on my carving board for about 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, I carve the roast into slices and arrange them on a warm plate. I'm going for a side of potato croquettes. I'm deep frying mine until they are beautifully golden brown. If you want to master these yourself, check out my dedicated video on how to make them from scratch. It's a fun process and honestly not hard to do. I finish the plate with a generous ladle of that rich Stroganoff sauce, the crispy croquettes, and a side of my fresh salad. Voila! Sunday on a plate. I hope you enjoy this one. Check out my video on how to make a green peppercorn sauce, or my video on how to make a black bean sauce. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.